Mary Celwood stood beneath the cold October rain, clutching her feverish 5-year-old daughter against her chest when the solicitor placed the inheritance papers on the table. Then he pushed $2,500 toward her. "Take it," Elias Thorne said, "and walk away." Mary looked at the money. For a woman who had spent her last coins buying medicine for Clara, it was an enormous amount. But there was something about the solicitor's expression that made her hesitate. "You said I inherited the estate," Mary said quietly. "You did? Then why are you paying me to leave?" Thorne leaned back in his chair. "Because some inheritances aren't worth having." Mary said nothing. Through the rain-streaked window behind him, she could see the dark outline of Blackwood Manor rising beyond the trees. It was larger than she had imagined. 3 stories of grey stone, broken windows, a sagging roof, ivy crawling across the walls as though the house had been abandoned for decades. That was the fortune her mother had somehow left behind, or so the papers claimed. Clara stirred weakly in Mary's arms. "Mommy?" Mary pulled the blanket tighter around her daughter. "I'm here." The solicitor opened the estate file again. Blackwood Manor includes 38 acres of land, several outbuildings, and substantial liabilities. "How much?" "Approximately $86,000. Mary's face fell. She had barely enough money to feed Clara for another week. Thorne watched her carefully. "That's why I'm offering you the settlement." "You said Mr. Blackwood left the property to me." "He did. Why?" The question seemed to irritate him. "Your mother had some connection to the Blackwood family. The details are old and, frankly, irrelevant." Mary looked down at the document. Her mother's name appeared beside the words, "Sole surviving heir." Her hands tightened around the paper. Her mother had never spoken about Blackwood Manor, not once. After her husband disappeared, Mary had spent months trying to keep herself and Clara afloat. She had taken sewing work, cleaned houses, and slept beside her daughter in a rented room that leaked whenever it rained. Then, 3 days earlier, a letter had arrived. Her mother was dead, and somehow a stranger named Alistair Blackwood had left Mary his estate. Now the lawyer wanted her gone before she had even seen it. Thorne slid the settlement closer. "Sign, Miss Celwood. Take the money. Go somewhere warm. Start over." Mary looked at Clara, then at the papers, then through the window at the distant manor. "No." The solicitor's expression hardened. "No. I want to see what my mother left me." For several seconds, Thorne said nothing. Then he slowly closed the file. "Very well." His voice had changed. "Tomorrow, you'll see Blackwood Manor." Mary didn't understand why those words sounded less like permission and more like a warning. "Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from?" The next morning, Mary arrived at Blackwood Manor just after sunrise. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey, and a thin mist hung over the fields surrounding the estate. Clara was asleep in Mary's arms. Mary stood before the enormous iron gates and stared at the house. Up close, Blackwood Manor looked even worse. Several windows were boarded shut. The stone walls were dark with moisture, and weeds had swallowed most of the path leading to the front entrance. A rusted sign hung crookedly beside the gate. Blackwood Estate. Mary reached for the gate. It opened with a long metallic groan. Behind her, Elias Thorne stepped out of his carriage. "You still have time to reconsider." Mary didn't turn around. "You said I should see the property myself." "I said you should understand what you're accepting." Mary walked toward the house. Thorne followed reluctantly. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust covered the furniture. A grandfather clock stood against one wall, its hands frozen at 11 minutes past 4. Mary looked around slowly. This place hasn't been lived in for years. Not properly, Thorne replied. Clara stirred. Mary carried her into the drawing room and carefully laid her on an old sofa. Then she noticed something unusual. There was fresh ash inside the fireplace. Mary frowned. She knelt beside it. The ashes were not grey and ancient. Some were still black. Someone had used the fireplace recently. She looked at Thorne. When was the last time anyone came here? He paused. Caretakers occasionally inspect the property. Recently? Perhaps. Mary stood. Who? Thorne ignored the question. Instead, he handed her a ring of old keys. Most rooms are unlocked. The east wing is not. Why? Structural damage. Mary looked toward the dark hallway. At the far end stood a pair of tall wooden doors. Both were secured with an iron lock. She remembered Thorne's words from the previous day. Some inheritances aren't worth having. Mary walked toward the doors. Mrs. Celwood? She stopped. There was something in his voice. Not irritation this time. Fear. Mary slowly turned. Thorne was staring at the locked doors. You said the house was worthless. It is. Then why are you afraid of me opening that room? For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Clara suddenly began coughing from the drawing room. Mary rushed back to her daughter. She lifted Clara into her arms and felt her forehead. Still burning. We need a doctor, Mary whispered. Thorne watched them quietly. Then he reached into his coat and removed a small envelope. There's something else you should know. Mary looked at him. What? He held out the envelope. It was found in your mother's belongings. Mary took it. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable. But the envelope had never been opened, and on the front were 5 words that made Mary's heart stop. Do not trust Elias Thorne. Mary did not open the envelope immediately. She stood in the cold drawing room with Clara asleep against her shoulder, staring at the 5 words written across the front. Do not trust Elias Thorne. The handwriting belonged to her mother. Mary had seen it thousands of times. She knew the sharp little curve of the M. She knew the way her mother pressed harder on the final letters of certain words. This was hers. But why had she written Thorne's name? Mary looked up. The solicitor was still standing near the doorway. You knew about this? Thorne's face had gone pale. No. You're lying. His jaw tightened. I have never seen that letter. Mary held it closer. Then why does my mother warn me about you? I can't answer a question based on something I haven't read. Mary almost opened it. Then Clara coughed. The sound was weak, but it immediately pulled Mary's attention away. She carried her daughter back toward the sofa and touched her forehead, still hot. We need to get her to a doctor. There is a physician in town, Thorne said. Then take us. He hesitated. That hesitation told Mary more than his words had. You don't want to help us. That isn't true. Then prove it. Thorne looked toward the window. Finally, he nodded. I'll have the carriage prepared. Mary watched him leave. The moment the door closed, she looked down at the envelope again. Her mother's warning had changed everything. Until that morning, Mary had believed she was simply a poor woman who had unexpectedly inherited a ruined estate. Now she wasn't so sure. She slipped the envelope inside her coat. She would not open it in front of Thorne. A few minutes later, while Clara slept, Mary began walking through the house. She passed the dining room, the library, and a long corridor lined with portraits. Every portrait showed a member of the Blackwood family. Men in dark suits, women in elaborate dresses, children with solemn expressions. Then Mary stopped. At the end of the corridor hung a portrait of a young woman. She looked to be about 25. Mary stared at her. The woman's face was strangely familiar. The same dark eyes, the same narrow chin, the same slight crease beside the mouth. Mary stepped closer. A brass plate beneath the portrait carried a single name: Eleanor Celwood. Mary's breath caught. Her mother. But there was something even stranger. Someone had recently wiped the dust from the portrait, and beneath it, on the floor, Mary noticed a small brass key. She picked it up. It was cold against her fingers. On its tiny metal tag were 2 words: East Wing. Mary looked toward the locked doors. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Thorne stood at the end of the corridor, and this time he wasn't pretending to be calm. "Put that key down," he said. Mary closed her fingers around the brass key. Thorne had stopped several feet away. For the first time since she met him, the solicitor looked genuinely frightened. "You heard me," he said. "Put it down." Mary didn't move. "You told me the East Wing was unsafe." "It is." "Then why does this key have its name on it?" Thorne's eyes shifted toward the locked doors. "Because Mr. Blackwood kept records there." "What kind of records?" "Old family documents." Mary looked at the key again. Her mother's portrait was still behind her. The dust beneath it had been disturbed. Someone had placed the key there. Someone wanted her to find it. "Did my mother have access to the East Wing?" Thorne hesitated. "Yes." The answer came so quickly that Mary knew he had been waiting for the question. "When?" "Years ago." "How many?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember?" Thorne's expression hardened. "Mrs. Celwood, you have been here less than an hour. You don't understand this family, this property, or what you're getting yourself involved in." Mary stepped closer. "My mother is dead." Thorne said nothing. "So if there is something about her life that I deserve to know, you're going to tell me?" His face remained expressionless. "No." Mary stared at him. Then she turned toward the East Wing. Thorne moved immediately. "Don't." Mary stopped. "Why?" He lowered his voice. "Because there are things in that house that should have remained buried." The words sent a chill through her. But Mary had spent too many years being told what she could not have. She had been told her husband would return. He never did. She had been told poverty was temporary. It wasn't. She had been told her mother's past was nothing worth discussing. Now she was standing inside a mansion her mother had apparently been connected to, holding a key marked for a forbidden room. Mary looked at Thorne. "I think I'll decide what should remain buried." She walked toward the locked doors. Behind her, Thorne whispered something she couldn't hear. Mary inserted the key. It turned. The lock clicked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Mary slowly pushed the door open. A wave of cold air drifted into the hallway. The room beyond was almost completely dark. Heavy curtains covered the windows. Old furniture stood beneath white sheets. Along one wall were dozens of wooden filing cabinets. Mary stepped inside. Her eyes slowly adjusted. Then she noticed something on the desk. A small leather-bound book. It was open to a single page. Mary approached it. There was only one sentence written there. Her mother's handwriting. "If Mary ever comes here, tell her the truth before they find her." Mary's heart began pounding. She looked back at Thorne. He was standing in the doorway. and now she understood something that frightened her more than the locked room itself. Her mother hadn't simply left her an inheritance. She had left her a warning. Mary read the sentence twice. "If Mary ever comes here, tell her the truth before they find her." The words were written in her mother's unmistakable hand, but there was no explanation of who they were. Mary turned toward Thorne. "Who was my mother afraid of?" He didn't answer. "Who are they?" "I don't know. You're a solicitor. You handled this estate. I handled the legal affairs of Mr. Blackwood. And my mother?" Thorne looked away. That was enough. Mary stepped farther into the room. The leather book lay open on the desk, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it were several folders, a rusted fountain pen, and a small wooden box. She opened the first folder. Inside were property records dating back nearly 30 years. The second contained bank statements. Mary frowned. The figures were enormous. Payments had been made into several accounts over many years, all connected to Blackwood Manor. But the estate was supposed to be drowning in debt. She turned another page. There were withdrawals too, large withdrawals. Some were signed by Alistair Blackwood, others carried a different name. Eleanor Celwood. Mary froze. Her mother's name appeared again and again, not as a beneficiary, not as a servant, as someone who had apparently controlled money connected to the estate. "How much did she have?" Thorne finally spoke. "Enough." Mary looked at him. "That isn't an answer." "No." He stepped into the room. "It's the only answer I can give you." Mary pushed another document toward him. "This says my mother withdrew $120,000 in 1998. Thorne said nothing. "Where did the money go?" "I don't know." "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to be careful." Mary's anger rose. "My mother died without telling me any of this. I have spent my entire life believing she was struggling just as I was." She picked up another scent. Aitment. Then she noticed something. Every large withdrawal had been followed by a transfer into a small local bank account. The account holder was not Eleanor Celwood. It belonged to a man named Samuel Reed. Mary had never heard the name. "What is this?" Thorne looked at the document. His expression changed. For several seconds, he didn't speak. Then he quietly said, "You should leave that alone." Mary stared at him. "Who is Samuel Reed?" Thorne's silence was answer enough. Mary gathered the papers. Then Clara called from the hallway. "Mommy?" Mary hurried toward her daughter, but before she reached the doorway, she heard a sound from somewhere deeper inside the east wing. 3 slow knocks. Mary stopped. Thorne stopped behind her. Neither spoke. The sound came again. 3 knocks, from behind a second locked door at the far end of the corridor. Mary looked at Thorne. His face had gone completely white. And this time, he didn't tell her to leave. He whispered only one sentence. "That's impossible." Mary stared at the locked door at the end of the corridor. 3 knocks had come from behind it. Then silence. "What is impossible?" she asked. Thorne didn't answer. "Mr. Thorne." He finally looked at her. "That room has been sealed for 19 years. Mary felt Clara's small hand tighten around hers. 19 years. Since the night your mother left Blackwood Manor. Mary looked at the door again. Her mother had never told her she had even been here. "Who sealed it?" Thorne hesitated. "Alistair Blackwood." "Why?" "I don't know. You know more than you're saying." Before he could respond, another sound came from behind the door. This time it wasn't a knock. It was the scrape of something heavy moving across the floor. Clara whimpered. Mary immediately pulled her daughter behind her. Thorne stepped backward. "We should leave." Mary looked at him. "You said there was nobody here." "There shouldn't be." That answer frightened her more than anything else. Mary reached for the door handle. Thorne caught her wrist. "Don't." She pulled free. "My daughter and I have nowhere else to go. You don't understand what you're doing." "No," Mary said quietly. "But I'm beginning to understand that you do." She inserted the brass key. It didn't fit. Mary frowned. She tried again. Nothing. Then she noticed a tiny keyhole beneath the handle. The brass key was too large. Someone had designed the lock to require 2 keys. Mary stepped back. "Where is the other one?" Thorne's silence was immediate. "You have it." "No." Mary searched his face. Then she noticed the chain attached to his pocket watch. A small silver key hung beside it. Thorne saw her looking. His expression changed. "Give me that key." "No." Mary stepped toward him. "This belonged to my mother." Thorne said nothing. She reached for the key. He moved away. For a brief moment they stood facing each other in the narrow hallway. Then Clara spoke softly. "Mummy, look." Mary turned. Her daughter was pointing toward the wall beside the locked door. A narrow section of wallpaper had come loose. Mary pulled it back. Behind it was a small wooden compartment. Inside lay a photograph. Mary took it out. Her breath caught. The photograph showed her mother standing beside Alistair Blackwood. But they weren't alone. Between them stood a little boy. Mary stared at the child's face. She knew him. Not personally, but from an old photograph her mother had kept hidden in a box for years. Mary turned the picture over. Written on the back were 6 words. Samuel was never supposed to survive. Mary's hands began to shake. She looked at Thorne. "Who is Samuel?" The solicitor closed his eyes, and when he finally answered, his voice was barely a whisper. "Your brother." Mary couldn't speak. Her brother. The words seemed impossible. For 26 years, she had believed she was an only child. Her mother had never mentioned a son. Not once. "Where is he?" Mary finally asked. Thorne looked toward the locked room. "I don't know. You just told me he's my brother." "I said he was." Mary's voice hardened. "Was?" Thorne lowered his eyes. "What happened to him?" He didn't answer. Mary stepped closer. "You owe me the truth." "I owe you nothing." The words came out sharply. Then Thorne seemed to regret them. Mary held up the photograph. "Then why did my mother hide this?" He looked at the child's face. "Because she was trying to protect you." "From what?" "From the Blackwoods." Mary shook her head. "My mother worked for them?" "No." "Then what was she doing here?" Thorne walked toward the window. For a long moment, he watched the mist hanging over the fields. "Your mother wasn't a servant, Mary." He finally turned. "She was Alistair Blackwood's daughter." Mary stared at him. "No. Your mother was born Eleanor Blackwood." Mary felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. Her entire life had been built around a woman named Eleanor Celwood. A poor woman. A quiet woman. A mother who had raised Mary alone. But now Thorne was telling her that woman had belonged to the very family whose estate Mary had inherited. Then why did she change her name? Because she left this house. Why? Thorne hesitated. Because of Samuel. Mary looked at the photograph again. What happened to him? Thorne's voice dropped. He disappeared. When? 19 years ago. The same year the east wing had been sealed. Mary looked toward the locked door. You said nobody had been inside since then. No one officially. Mary's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Thorne didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the old desk and opened a drawer. From beneath several folders, he removed a small black ledger. He placed it in Mary's hands. This is why I wanted you to take the money and leave. Mary opened the ledger. Inside were names, dates, payments, and beside several names were handwritten notes. Some had been crossed out, others were marked with a single word. Paid. Mary turned another page, then another. Her mother appeared again, so did Samuel. And beneath Samuel's name was a date. October 17th, 2007. Tomorrow. Mary looked up. That date hasn't happened yet. Thorne's face drained of color. He took the ledger from her. Then he stared at the page. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Finally, from somewhere inside the sealed east wing, came 3 slow knocks. This time, Mary knew they were coming from the other side of the wall. And someone had just written a date for something that hadn't happened yet. Mary could not take her eyes off the date. October 17th, 2007. It was the date written beneath Samuel's name. But the year was still 2006. She looked at Thorne. How could this have been written before the date happened? The solicitor didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the bottom drawer of the desk and removed a small envelope. It was old. The paper had yellowed around the edges. Mary recognized the handwriting immediately. Her mother's. This was meant for you, Thorne said. Mary took it carefully. Why didn't you give it to me before? Because I was hoping you would leave. Mary looked at him. And now? Now I don't think leaving will protect you. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. Mary unfolded it with trembling hands. The first line made her stop breathing. My dearest Mary. She had not seen those words in years. Her mother had always called her that. Mary continued reading. She learned that Eleanor had been born into the Blackwood family but had rejected her inheritance after discovering that Alistair had been hiding money from the estate. She had tried to expose him. But then she discovered something worse. Samuel. Her little brother had been taken from the house as a child after witnessing something he was never supposed to see. Eleanor had spent years trying to find him. She never succeeded. The letter explained why she had kept Mary away from Blackwood Manor. She had believed that if Mary knew the truth, someone would eventually use her to reach the family fortune. Then came the part Mary struggled to read. I left the estate to you because I finally discovered what your grandmother hid. The money was never gone. It was moved, hidden under names that no one would connect to Blackwood. Mary lowered the letter. Her inheritance was not the ruined manor. The manor was only the beginning. The real fortune had been concealed for decades. Her mother had discovered its existence shortly before her death, and she had left Mary one final instruction. Do not trust the first account you are shown. Do not trust the first person who tells you what this estate is worth. And above all, Do not let them convince you to sign anything. Mary looked at Thorn. You knew. I suspected. How much? He swallowed. Enough to know that the estate may be worth far more than the figure written in the probate papers. Mary looked back at the letter. At the bottom was one final sentence. If Samuel is still alive, he is the only person who can tell you where I hid the proof. Mary's heart began pounding. Samuel is alive? Thorn didn't answer. Then something struck the wall behind them. Once, twice, 3 times. Mary turned toward the sealed room. The sound came again. But this time it was followed by a voice. Faint, weak, almost impossible to hear. Mary. She froze. Clara grabbed her hand. Mary stared at the locked door. Someone inside had just spoken her name. Mary stood completely still. The voice had been unmistakable. Mary. Clara buried her face against her mother's coat. Thorn whispered, Don't answer. Mary turned toward him. Why? Because if that is Samuel, we need to know who else is in this house. Mary stared at the locked door. For 26 years, she had believed her brother was dead. Now someone behind that door had called her by name. She inserted the brass key again. This time, the lock opened. The door swung inward. Beyond it was a narrow passage hidden inside the walls of Blackwood Manor. Mary held Clara close as she stepped inside. The passage smelled of dust, damp stone, and something faintly metallic. At the end stood a small room. A man was sitting beside an old iron stove. He was thin, pale, and much older than the child in the photograph. But his eyes were the same. Mary knew immediately. Samuel. The man slowly looked up. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then his eyes filled with tears. Eleanor's daughter. Mary couldn't breathe. You're my brother. Samuel nodded. He looked toward Thorn. You finally brought her here. Thorn lowered his head. I didn't bring her. Samuel gave a tired smile. She came because you couldn't stop her. On the table beside him was a wooden box. Samuel pushed it toward Mary. This belonged to our mother. Mary opened it. Inside were bank certificates, property deeds, photographs, and dozens of handwritten records. But one document was different. It carried the seal of a private bank and listed a trust established decades earlier. Mary read the final figure. 4,200,000. Her hands began to shake. The fortune was real. The ruined estate had never been worthless. The debt had been deliberately exaggerated. The money had been hidden through trusts and shell accounts so that certain members of the Blackwood family could never claim it. Thorn finally spoke. Your mother discovered the accounts shortly before she died. Mary looked at him. And you? I discovered them after she was gone. Then why did you try to make me leave? Thorn looked ashamed. Because someone paid me to make sure you signed the refusal. Who? Before he could answer, Samuel reached for another document. He placed it in front of Mary, a signed agreement. At the bottom was a name she recognized immediately, the man who had been trying to buy the estate for years, and beside his signature was a payment amount. $75,000. Mary stared at the document. He paid you. Thorn nodded. Yes. You were going to steal my inheritance. No, Thorn said quietly. I was going to help him steal it. The room fell silent. Mary looked at Samuel, then at the documents, then at the fortune her mother had hidden for so many years. She finally understood why everyone had wanted her to leave. But there was still one question. "If you knew the truth," Mary asked Samuel, "why didn't you come home?" Samuel looked toward the door. "Because the man who ordered me to disappear never stopped looking." And then someone outside the room turned the handle. The door handle moved again. Mary pulled Clara behind her. Samuel stood slowly, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. Thorne whispered, "There isn't another way out." Then the door opened. A man stepped into the passage. He was not carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. His expression told Mary that he had come expecting to find something that belonged to him. Instead, he found her. "Give me the documents," he said. Mary held the wooden box tightly. "No." The man's face hardened. "You don't understand what you're holding." "I understand enough." Behind him, 2 other men appeared, but before they could enter, Samuel stepped forward. "They're finished," he said. The first man stared at him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel smiled faintly. "You spent 19 years believing I was dead." The man's expression changed. Mary understood. This was the man who had kept her brother hidden, the man who had tried to control the Blackwood fortune, and the man who had paid Thorne to make her disappear. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated the woman standing in front of him. Mary had already seen the documents, the bank certificates, the trust records, the signed agreement. Everything was evidence. Within days, the matter reached the county courthouse. The hidden accounts were verified. The original Blackwood trust was restored, and the final valuation shocked everyone involved. The inheritance was worth $4.2 million. Not $2,500, not a ruined estate drowning in debt. $4,200,000. The $86,000 in supposed liabilities had been deliberately inflated to frighten Mary into surrendering the property. Elias Thorne lost his license and later faced criminal charges for his involvement. The men who had attempted to conceal the trust were investigated, and Samuel, after nearly 12 decades of living under another name, finally returned home. But Mary never cared much about the money itself. She used part of the inheritance to restore Blackwood Manor. The broken windows were replaced. The roof was repaired. The neglected gardens were cleared. The east wing, once sealed and feared, became a library filled with her mother's books and family records. She created a small fund for families in Oak Haven who were struggling to keep their homes. And Clara grew up knowing something Mary herself had never known as a child: where she belonged. Years later, Mary sometimes stood on the manor's front steps at sunset and remembered the woman who had arrived there with $3.18 in her purse and a sick child in her arms. She remembered the solicitor pushing $2,500 across a desk. She remembered being told she was foolish to stay. And she remembered the locked door. Mary never regretted refusing that money, because the greatest thing she inherited was not the $4.2 million. It was the truth about the family she thought she had lost. Inside the restored house, her mother's portrait hung above the fireplace. Beside it was Samuel's photograph. And beneath them, Mary had placed the old brass key. The key that had once opened a door everyone wanted kept closed. Now it rested in plain sight, and no one was afraid of it anymore.